Hello, time for another Man in Gray book review. I've been asked by a few viewers if I would talk about some of my favorite books, and so today I'm going to review one of my favorite nonfiction books, a book that had a big impact on me when I first read it in the 1980s, and a book that I come back to occasionally. It's The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat and Other Clinical Tales by Oliver Sacks. This book was originally published in 1985. This reprint edition is from 2021. It's 320 pages. Oliver Sacks was a British-born American neurologist who was born in 1933 and died in 2015. He's famous for a series of best-selling books that he published, made up mostly of case studies of patients, neurology patients that he studied over the years. His most famous book is called Awakenings, and it's about a series of patients that he dealt with early in his career in the 1960s in New York. These were people who were in a catatonic state, sort of almost semi-comatose, because in the 1920s, when they were kids, they contracted something called a sleeping sickness, a viral disease that damaged their brain and left them in this kind of half asleep, half awake state, sort of comatose. And one day, one of the patients started showing symptoms of Parkinson's disease, and so Sachs gave this patient some L-Dopa, which is a drug that's used to mitigate the effects of Parkinson's. And the L-Dopa brought the person back out of his comatose state. He suddenly, it's like Rip Van Winkle. He suddenly came to life again and was able to walk around and talk. And so Sachs gave L-Dopa to all of the patients, and they all responded favorably. They all came out of their state. But tragically, the effects were temporary because the brains adjusted to the L-Dopa, and then they all returned back to their catatonic state, which is why L-Dopa doesn't cure Parkinson's also, because it can lessen the symptoms, but the brain adapts to it. So this book was a big bestseller, and it was later made into a popular movie starring Robert De Niro and Robin Williams. This particular book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, one of the chapters in it was made into an opera by Michael Nyman. This book is a series of case studies of people who had damage to the right hemisphere of their brain, which affects your ability to see shapes and nonverbal communication and really establish your reality. All the people in this book had some severe damage to their right hemisphere, which really affected their perception of reality. The title story is about a college music professor who, because of an inoperable brain tumor, was no longer able to recognize shapes. And the title is actually true. He actually thought his wife's head was his hat. He put his hat on top of a sofa, and when he went to pick it up, he grabbed his wife's head instead. And only when she called out did he realize that he wasn't picking up a hat. During one test, Sachs gives the professor a glove and asks him what it is. And the professor looks at it very carefully, and he gives a detailed description of the shape and the holes in it and so forth. But when he's asked, what is it, he doesn't know. It's only when he accidentally slips the glove on his hand that he realizes it's a glove. And one of the most heartbreaking parts of this chapter is the wife shows Sachs a collection of paintings that the professor had done over the years, and they start out as conventional landscapes and traditional landscapes, and gradually they become more and more abstract, and the last few paintings are just swirls of color and odd shapes. And she says to Sachs, see how he has evolved his art over the years from traditional to abstract. And Sachs thinks to himself, this isn't evolution of style. He's still painting what he sees, but now all he sees are blurs of shapes. And so the paintings actually show his deterioration of his brain over the years. The astonishing thing is that as devastating as this brain tumor was for him, he was still able to continue teaching music at this college. He'd put on his clothes and walk to the classroom every day and teach a lesson, even though he couldn't recognize the shapes of the faces of his students. He had to memorize their voices to know who was doing what. There's another chapter which I found very affecting about a man who was an alcoholic and suffered a major epileptic seizure. And when he recovered from it, he had what's called anterograde amnesia, which means that you can remember the past, but you can't form any new memories. And this man was trapped in the past in the deep past. He thought he was 19 years old and serving in the Navy. And he couldn't understand what he was doing in the hospital because there was a war on. And every time he looked in the mirror, he was astonished to see how old he was, because at this point he was in his 70s. And he was really upset when his brother showed up to visit him because he couldn't understand why his brother looked so old. But his upset nature, his confusion only lasted a few minutes, because as soon as his brother left, he forgot everything. And of course, every time the doctor would go out and come back in, he wouldn't know the doctor. He could only remember things for maybe 90 seconds or maybe 2 minutes at most. And so he was trapped in the past, but he still was able to function to a degree. The final scene of that chapter, he's participating in a mass in a hospital, and because he had memorized the script of the mass and the songs and so forth, he was able to participate because he still remembered those. So the church attendance was a link to his past that he was able to still do in the present. The theme that runs through all these chapters is the often heroic attempts these people make to try to get on with their lives despite being devastatingly damaged from various car accidents or brain tumors or whatever, alcoholism or whatever. It's really severely affected their perception. And oftentimes they're not even aware of it. There's a chapter in here of a man who was blind, but refused to acknowledge that he was blind. He thought he could still see. And he also had anterograde amnesia and thought it was 1968. And Sax takes him to a Grateful Dead concert, and he recognizes the old songs. But when they start playing songs from the 70s and 80s, he doesn't recognize them and thinks, well, this, and he says to him, this must be some kind of future music that they're working on. Of course, by then, those were all old hits as well. So it's a really impressive book. And the reason it made such an impact on me is that it made me realize just how our whole sense of reality and how we perceive the world and the universe really comes down to just a few square centimeters of brain tissue in the right side of our brain. If something happens to that, our whole personality can change, our whole perception of the world can change. But humans being humans, we try to soldier on regardless. And that's the theme that really runs through most of Sax's books, is the courage that people have despite having all these brain anomalies, that they continue on and try to function as best they could. So if you haven't read any of Oliver Sacks's book, this one is a really good one. It's made up, the chapters are fairly short, and so you can kind of pick and choose or read the whole thing straight through, but I think you would really enjoy it. And Sacks, of course, was a remarkable writer. I've found that a lot of doctors really make good writers, and Sacks is certainly no exception. He wrote in a very empathetic, lyrical style. And so I'd really recommend any of his books, but particularly this one. It's my favorite of all of his. The book is The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. The author is Oliver Sacks. This has been another Man in Great Book Review. Thanks for watching.